guys, I'm Andrey, I'm a filmmaker, I'm from Russia, and in this video I will tell you about my lighting techniques, my production way and my filmmaking way.
The cinematic light has a variety of different factors. The first factor is accent. With the help of the accent, with the right light in the frame, you can highlight objects in the frame like people, emotions and other objects that are important to the story. The main task of the light in the frame is to underline, to highlight what the viewer should see. The next one is volume and working with the volume. Working with a frame is similar to creating the picture but only using the light. To make this picture beautiful, we need to make it volumetric. We need to create the volume. The high quality cinematic light in most cases look volumetric. How can we create this volume? The most common way is to use contrast. Usually we work with the foreground and background using light, and usually we use different types of light. In most cases, I think the cinematic image, the image in the frame, looks volumetric because we work with the contrast of light and dark areas in the frame. In that case, this type of contrast works with highlights. We highlight the foreground, it highlights the background, and we understand which is where. The next thing that really influences the frame is the mood and the atmosphere. So, the light doesn't not only need to be beautiful and nice, it must tell a story to be part of the story and the characters. As I have already said, the light is an instrument that can manipulate the viewer's attention, the viewer's mood. When we look at the picturesque, beautiful lights, we subconsciously understand the information about the world where the characters live. I take the cinematic picture as a reference because most examples of advertisement or any commercials originally, the light, the mood, the atmosphere is taken from the cinema. I'm sure that you have already heard about the 3-point lighting techniques in the cinema process. The technique would be very useful for you if you just started your way as a director of photography, especially if you are shooting interviews or dialogues or something like that. This technique is mostly used in middle shots because it doesn't require any special efforts. It is quite simple, and it doesn't require any expensive equipment or stuff like this. This technique is called a 3-point light because we have 3 sources of light. The first source is the key light. It is the main light in the scene because it highlights the most part of you as a character or the most part of your face. Most often it is used on a sideline because it can create an enlightened shadow contrast. In order to make the speaker's face look a little bit softer, usually along with key light techniques, we have the fill light to fill the dark area, to fill the shadow area. The third point is the backlight. The backlight is usually put in the background and is used to create the silhouette, which will highlight the speaker from the back. The main feature of this setup is that it looks very cinematic. It looks like an interview. The main idea is that the light usually must be or should be motivated, but when we look at the 3-point light techniques, we don't understand how the light is motivated. The setup is very good for people who just started their path in cinematography, just to understand how to create the cinematic image. This image may not be very realistic, but it would look beautiful. If you want to have a realistic shot, if you want to have a realistic picture, you will need to motivate any source of light, and if you motivate it, it will look even better. When you have a really low budget for your work, I would recommend working with a natural light source like the sun or the sky or anything like this. To control these sorts of sources of light, you will need the grip. At first, I would recommend having the object that reflects light. It can be something like white fabric, silver, or stuff like this that reflects light. Also, if you work with the sunlight, you will need anything that can work with a diffusion of the light. It can also be a white fabric or anything like this. But the main idea is to work with the hardness of the light because usually the sunlight is quite hard. And the third piece of equipment that you need is something that will help you work with the shadows. Working with the shadow in the frame usually looks like using the negative fill in the frame to make the artificial shadow. On location, it can help you working with the fill-in light. When we have all this equipment that doesn't require a lot of money, when we work with natural sources of light, I really recommend not copying, but using other people's work as a reference, as an inspiration to learn how to work with shadows in the nature. We have a cool situation when we have instruments that do not cost much money, and also we have the understanding of how to work with these instruments, because this is even more important than the instrument itself. So, if you want to make the picture look cinematic, you will need to have something that reflects light, something that diffuses light on some negative field anyway. So, talking about a little bit more expensive equipment, I can recommend not as a commercial, it is just my opinion. I use them many times and I like using them, so Godox, Aperture and Light Panel. I really recommend these brands because they are quite powerful, but at the same time not very expensive, and I really recommend using powerful light source if you want to light a spacious location. It's about 300 to 500 watts. Also, these brands have equipment that can have very different and interesting effects, like strobes, gradients that can change the temperature, etc. If we talk about a little bit more expensive examples, it can be some brands like Arri or Dedelight. If you are just a beginner and you need the cheapest light source just to get an experience, just to gain the experience, you may use the halogen light source. You can find them even in like department stores, where they don't cost a lot. Also, you can find them on AliExpress, Amazon or eBay, and it will not cost a fortune either. My main advice is that when you try to find the halogen lamp, don't get the weaker option. Try to find one as powerful as you can. I really recommend buying at least 1 kilowatt. Also, I really recommend using this light source with dimmer to control the power. And I should remind you that this light source is very hot, and just be careful with that when you use it. If we talk about the equipment that is a little bit more expensive than halogen, I really recommend paying attention to LED sources. As an example, you can pay attention to Godox brand. I will not recommend Nanlite because I haven't worked with them. But if you watch enough reviews on that, you may decide yourself. During a bigger project, you will definitely have the person who will help you choose the right light source, and this person is usually called gaffer or the director of photography. At first, everything depends on the gaffer, but in most cases, the director or the director of photography works with the light in the scene. Also, there can be the influence of a client, if it is a commercial video, or maybe some kind of music video where the singer can determine or decide on the light. If it is a commercial video, we need to take the client's opinion into account because you need to make the client happy. During the communication with the client, there is usually a whole like a long chain of production process during which the client usually knows what type of light does he or she want. But most often, the director decides. The director usually thinks about some visual part. He imagines the picture. How should it look like? What light does he want? The cameraman or the director of photography in that case usually helps with the technical side of fulfilling this idea. But if we talk about indie directors, usually one person is responsible for everything. So the creator is responsible for playing the one-man band. Also, it depends very much on what country do we work in. I know that in some countries only the gaffer or director of photography is responsible for the light in the scene. Why the light is so important in any artwork? Why choosing the light is so important? Because we speak a visual language which can be understood by the viewers. The light is one of the most important languages when we talk about a conversation between the viewer, the creator, and the world. For example, the horror light and comedy light would be very different in their mood and in their atmosphere, because you need to create different atmosphere. It's like manipulating the viewer's emotions with the help of the light. The most common and one of the coolest techniques of working with light is the light and shadow contrast. You can see this type of contrast in almost any film. It is used everywhere from commercials to real cinema. The main principle of light and shadow contrast is that the image looks like a zebra. You use dark and shadow areas as well as light areas. The main idea of using this contrast and the main task when you're using this type of contrast is to combine the light and dark areas in the frame, so they create a rhythm. It is very important to understand that there is no like a magic bean or a magic wand that will help you to make the scene more cinematic just in 1, 2, or 3 steps. You need to practice as much as you can because your first steps, first final films, usually will not look like you want them to look. I can give you only a few tips to make it better. The first tip is to choose the location wisely. You need a spacious, good location that will look cinematic itself without any lighting tips and techniques. It will be extremely difficult for you to get a good frame in a narrow location or a studio. The second advice is that as soon as you have found the suitable location, start thinking about what can motivate your light to find the main source of light, but how to motivate, how it is possible to motivate the light. For example, if you use the warm light in the frame, then you can motivate it. For example, you are using the warm light in the frame. To make it more realistic, to make it motivated, you can use the floor lamp in the frame that will give us the light, but also behind the lamp there can be a light source. This is called the motivated light. The third tip is to use the side key light, which is the simpler and looks the most cinematic from all the lighting schemes. But when you are using the side key light, don't forget to control the hardness of the light, because if the light is too hard, there can be some ugly shadows on the face.
Все? Спасибо.